All right, my guest today is Jonathan Weins, the co-founder of Pop Meals. For those of you who don't know, Pop Meals is an F&B company leveraging tech and data to enable tailored experiences with better quality and lower prices. Thank you very much for being here, John.
I'm very excited for our chat.
Excellent, excellent. So I want to know the origin story. So you were the first company out of Malaysia to get into YC. Take me back to the earliest days in regards to how you became an entrepreneur, what that early experience was like, and how you landed on the current concept.
Yeah, actually, the story goes even further back because so kind of, I guess, the first touch with entrepreneurship I had actually while studying on exchange in Hong Kong. So originally I'm from Germany, did a student exchange in Hong Kong. During that time, participated in like a entrepreneurship class and was kind of like pre-lean startup methodology, etc. So I learned a lot of, these things. You write like a long business plan and all of these things that you might not want to do necessarily, but I met one of my co-founders during that time. And I think for us, we bounced off a lot of different ideas, startup ideas initially. Nothing kind of came out of that, but then eventually I got the chance actually to roll out one of the largest food delivery marketplaces here in the region, so for the Hong Kong market. And that really brought me into the food industry, right? So and I started also working together now with our second co-founder. So two of us rolled out this marketplace. I signed up hundreds of restaurants. Quickly understood, how big the demand is for convenient, affordable, delicious food in Asia, in Southeast Asia, right? And at the same time also to see kind of firsthand how low or even no tech the F&B industry is. And for me, always what has been always fascinating is kind of the use of data, right? How do we bring, all of this feedback that customers have, how can we turn that into better products, right? And if you look at a traditional F&B industry, it's essentially, you have customers who love, talk about food all day long, right? They have so many ideas, what makes a dish more tasty, etc. Right? But then typically the chef lacks kind of this data, and there's no information flow, and that's was one of the big inspiration for the business that we then launched to really change that and to just use technology to make a much more relevant, much more exciting product for customers, and then also reduce a lot of the inefficiencies and waste, frankly, that you have in F&B to just pass on more value to consumers.
Okay. So tell me when you're getting started. I mean, it was quite a big deal at the time, being the first Malaysian-based company, getting into YC. Tell me about that process in regards to, was that kind of the ambition to begin with? Did somebody kind of push you in that direction, or what led you to try and pursue that pathway in the first place?
Yeah, so in terms of YC specifically, I think it's quite funny because we were not sure if it made sense for us at the beginning to join Y Combinator, because obviously, I mean, it's, I guess one of the most known accelerators, but like very Silicon Valley based, right? Yeah. So we were not too sure, hey, we are here based in Malaysia and Southeast Asia. How much can we really benefit from that? So we were a bit hesitant, but then one now founder of a unicorn, actually, he really pushed us during that time and said like, hey, you guys should really apply, and it's super useful. And then we went through the process, and it was multi-stage process, right? First, like you have to kind of do like a video, introduce the company, introduce the co-founders, and then multiple kind of video interviews, and you fly there and meet the partners there and go there through the selection process. And then luckily we got through all of that, and I think looking back was definitely one of the best choices we made. And
and it was in the days of the physical cohorts as well, so you actually relocated for a bit of time to San Francisco.
Exactly. There was also where initially we were not super sure if that makes sense, right? Because you have your operation business here. You at the beginning we were like heavily involved in the operations. I mean, a part of us were even like supervising the cooking of the meals. So kind of so I was the lucky one out of the three of us to spend time in the Bay Area, and absolutely amazing experience.
Yeah. There's definitely a vibe of when you're there that you kind of absorb a lot of knowledge from the networking events, simply going to the coffee shop and striking up a chat with somebody. There's definitely a characteristic of, at some point, a lot of founders ought to take a pilgrimage, let's call it, and
Right.
spend a little bit of time there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you come back after the program, you're building it up, you know, at some point you end up taking a big pivot. Can you tell me a little bit about the story of what led to that? And I'm assuming there's a bunch of learnings that you developed from it as you kind of shifted forward, and maybe even some scar tissue as well. So hopefully we don't get too sensitive here.
Yeah, no, I think that's been a very, very, very interesting journey. And definitely, I think the previous model, just to give a bit more context, right? So was a vertically integrated food delivery model where, as a customer, you could just order online and we would deliver then from, I mean, now it's called dark kitchens or cloud kitchens. During that time, there wasn't even really a term. So kind of essentially pioneering that model. We grew very fast and kind of also saw the unit economics working out relatively well. However, what we noticed, the more we grew, we kind of you continuously had to spend money on marketing to acquire customers, because it is more challenging to build a very strong consumer brand purely online than if you have this physical connection where the customer can actually see the brand, experience the brand, right? And I think that's also a learning that has been shared by many of the D2C brands all over the world, right? If you think the Warby Parker or Casper or there's so many examples of that.
Yeah, a lot of them set up physical locations now. Yeah,
because it's extremely powerful, right, for the customer to come into like a location, see like a staff smiling and kind of translating that brand.
We had local startup Sono, which is similar to Casper here in Malaysia, doing similar sort of physical location, omni-channel, let's call it now.
Yeah, I actually have a blanket from them, so great product. Shout out to them. And so I think what was very interesting, so when then the pandemic hit in 2020, actually kind of contrary to what many people expected, our business was significantly impacted, right? I mean, during that time, everybody saw kind of food delivery rising. However, our prior business was heavily focused on kind of the office lunch crowd, with a lot of essentially most of the orders came from corporates or at least office locations. So now when your customers are not anymore at in the office where they normally order, that meant revenues were significantly impacted. I think retrospectively definitely kind of a blessing in disguise, because it allowed us to kind of relook at the business model and especially the distribution channel, and kind of ask ourselves, how can we implement all of the learnings that we had over the last couple of years to just significantly improve on this business model. And then that has been very successful and allowed us to now grow much faster and especially much more profitably.
Okay. Yeah, I remember in those days I was a subscriber where you had some sort of like prepay for a certain amount of meals and you end up getting it slightly discounted, all of that. But around that same time, there were a number of like copycats that ended up popping up. And from the packaging on down, a lot of it was quite similar. Did that also play a role as far as like establishing the brand and the relationship with the consumer, where the switching costs and the brand value was difficult to establish?
No, I think that was fine. In fact, I would say we were extremely good at building a very strong brand where people had a lot of people knew us and had a very good understanding what the brand stands for. At the same time, also we realized as kind of founders, right, we wanted to really use technology and data to have a big impact on the wide population, right, to make just the average person's life a bit better through the power of food, right? But when we looked at our customer group, we realized we were like really serving the top 10%, top 1% income bracket, which was not fully aligned with what we kind of wanted to do as founders. And then speaking to customers, we realized also a lot of customers were actually, they knew the brand, but they hadn't even tried us because they had this preconceived notion about that the brand is very premium, probably very expensive. The food is very healthy and more like bland. So like a lot of ideas in the customer's mind that we were able to create through marketing which in the end kind of hurt us to go into a much broader market. So therefore then we completely also changed the brand, right? Overnight, essentially rebranded to a much more approachable brand identity, changed the name, changed the colors for more like a white, black, green premium to now like much more yellow, much more friendly.
Yeah,
brand
much
design.
more vibrant, kind of. It does kind of pop. So, I think it's appropriately named. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course also we, in terms of the pricing, right, completely changed the price point to really be able to use of the technology assets that we had already built to just serve meals at much more affordable prices, and with that then really serve like the mid-income consumer, even upper lower
Sure.
segments. Again, which was much more aligned in terms of the vision, and also obviously significantly opens up the possibilities, right?
Sure. So let's talk about the aspect of going physical, because there's a lot of additional operational aspects that come when you're managing physical locations, from the prior to launch of site selection, all of these sort of aspects, down to having on-site employees. When you were getting ready to make this pivot and looking at going into the physical locations, how did you guys go about analyzing to make sure that, like, when you started doing step 1, step 2, that you knew what you were doing? What was that early part of the process logically?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say it was extremely experimental and essentially taking like the the lean startup methodology, where you kind of set up an MVP in a sense, right, and kind of take that to approach that evolution of the business. So the first indicator that this made sense, we actually had even pre-pandemic and pre kind of pivot, because we did a lot of like offline marketing where kind of we distributed, we sold like meals in office lobbies, and we were always surprised how much positive reception we got from that. And that kind of gave us an idea that, okay, if you're there when the customer has the problem that you're solving, right, you have the food ready when they're hungry. Mm-hmm. It makes sense, and it removes a lot of the friction, right? So that was kind of the first indicator. And then we said, like, okay, let's take this a step further. Let's set up our first omni-channel physical presence, right? And that was actually right in the middle of the pandemic, where everybody was like completely moving away from that, moved to delivery, and people kind of thought we were like a bit crazy in a sense. But we were betting on that eventually the pandemic would ease up, and this would work out, right? So first very, very, very quick process, essentially building like the first location, like a MVP. It also looks completely different now than any of our new, so we call them these locations smart outlets. So the first smart outlet looks completely different in terms of design, etc., from the latest location, simply because of all the learnings in the operation, in terms of the customer experience, etc., etc. Yeah, and in terms of obviously a lot of learnings around the site location, etc. I think generally the interesting bit is to be in the F&B industry is that again, most of the industry is extremely old school, right? I mean, it's one of the oldest industry. So there's a huge opportunity to just get significant advantages by using technology, latest data, and kind of coming in with like a hybrid mind where you're excited about food, but you're also excited about technology and
sure.
Using that.
You referenced earlier in this conversation about that when the patron of a restaurant orders food and has their own thoughts on what could make it more tasty, is it spicy enough, all of those sort of things. Is that the type of data that you're talking about, or what's the extent? Walk me through the extent of what data you think is currently not captured in F&B and how you guys are kind of leveraging that.
Yeah, I think generally, I mean, it's the opportunity goes way beyond data across like various parts of technology. When we speak specifically about data, then for sure it's around just building the best possible recipes, right? Designing the best possible recipes by continuously collecting customer feedback data and kind of iteratively developing a recipe, which is very different from what has been traditionally done. And normally, what happens is just, I mean, there are different pathways, but like either, you know, you have like some kind of famous recipe, maybe the grandma has some recipe, and then, you know, they start, like a restaurant starts based on that, or you, a restaurateur hires like an outside consultant who develops a menu. In both of these instances, it's kind of, you have the products, right, the recipe, and then you leave it like that. It's like stagnant, it doesn't change. Hence, most restaurants never change the menu, or maybe after like a year or 2 years, right? For us as founders, right, we come, especially my co-founder, obviously completely from a software development point of view, where that's not how you develop software, right? How you develop software by continuously looking at metrics, continuously speaking to users, and iteratively improving, you know, every single part of it, every feature, right? And so we kind of took that mindset and applied to food, which is, on one hand, you need this type of mindset. On the other hand, obviously, you need the access to the type of data to be able to do that, right? And that's kind of where we focused a lot in terms of building out the apps, optimizing kind of the ability for customers to give feedback, that we can get all of that data. And the last piece to that is really important, is in terms of, we also need the supply chain to be able to actually use that data and make changes to recipes. Even if we look at the $200 billion company, McDonald's, or like any of the other billion-dollar companies, right? They typically have like extremely stiff supply chain, which are almost designed to avoid product innovation, because they work with franchisees. As a franchise owner, you don't want your franchisees to make a lot of changes, etc.
Right.
So kind of the legacy structure essentially almost prohibit product innovation by design, right? And that's again something where you need to completely approach that differently, build a very differentiated supply chain and value chain.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do you see this sort of iterative approach towards the recipes and all of that, with kind of the brand aspect of consistency, reliability? I think if you look at some of those established F&B fast food chains like McDonald's, like you referenced, no matter where in the world you go, you generally speaking, the menu that's consistent, the taste is consistent, all of that. They kind of built it in, like they don't want any change for like the last, I don't even know how many years. But there's an experience value to where you know what you're getting. How do you kind of view that from that perspective, in being able to continually entice and attract kind of the loyal person?
Yeah, definitely. There's like kind of, you have to find a balance, because there's inherently like a bit of a tension, right? On one hand, people are excited about the most delicious taste, and they're excited about new things, but they also want to to know a bit what the brand stands for and what the offering is like, right? So therefore, finding that balance is very important. So for us, that means we continuously, especially I guess right now, most of the effort is on just making the existing recipes better through, and where we can then look through the data to really achieve that. And in terms of new product launches, that's something where which allows us to drive customers and kind of keep them coming back more frequent than what you would normally do in the traditional industry, right? But it's I think something quite interesting, which also we always mindful to balance that, because again, you don't want next week like completely the menu is completely different, and you as a consumer, you love the product, next week it's not there anymore, or it completely tastes different, right? So
right.
So yeah.
So let me ask you on the supply chain aspect, because that's a big thing when you're looking at flexibility versus the rigidity aspect of it, because there's a component of quality control of the inputs. I think most of those places that do like French fries or whatever, they're very particular on what type of potato and all of these sort of things. When you look at scaling the model and maintaining flexibility, how is your viewpoint on managing the supply chain from the quality control aspect? And do you manage end to end, or are there third parties that you're leveraging in order to accommodate that?
Yeah. The consistency, it's extremely important, right? Especially when we collect data, etc., because otherwise the data collection is pointless, right? If the recipes change without, you intentionally making changes to the recipe, then there's no point kind of collecting any feedback, right? So that's super important in terms of scalability. I think it's all about like the operating system and the supply chain that you build in order to essentially do both, right? You need the ability to capture the economies of scale so that you can provide a lot of value to consumers, but at the same time you also need the ability to make changes quickly and launch new products quickly, right? So I think for us, we've been quite interested kind of in how Shein, for instance, built their supply chain, right? So the fast, or I think by now it's called even a real-time fashion company, right?
Yep.
So they have exactly kind of achieved that as well, where you combine economies of scale with the ability to iteratively make changes rapidly, right, in small batches.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And when you talk about the product offering and introducing new products, is there an aspect of sunsetting some, bringing on new ones, or how do you consider kind of the formulation of making sure that the menu of options don't get too big, so that you can zero in and make sure that you're controlling kind of supply costs and all of that?
Yeah, we are pretty radical at this point, right? Any product that is where we don't see that the customer satisfaction is at a pretty high level, so we measure that in certain metrics. And so the bar is quite high to make it essentially onto the menu and as an item to stay on the menu. And the same, of course, in terms of popularity. So the moment, if something doesn't contribute, say, less than 1% of sales to the menu, then we quickly also take it off, right? Obviously, there are different variances to that. Yeah, so if something is popular but the ratings are not good, that typically means we look more and more into the data. Okay, how can we make the recipe better? Because it tells us the item is relevant, customer want it, but they just don't like how it's currently prepared, right? So normally that should allow us then to optimize the rating so that we have then really like a high performing item, both in terms of popularity and the rating. Obviously, if you have something which is quite interesting, we had this before, super high rated, but just not, almost no one buys it, right? Then that hurts a bit, because you obviously you have like something really amazing, but if no one cares about it, then that's a shame. But then we have to kick it off, right?
Yeah.
And so currently we're pretty radical to really make sure to keep the offering very, very focused in terms of relevancy and ratings.
And so let me dig into this on the ratings and adjusting the menu and the recipes. So when you talk about scaling and you get a larger and larger geographical footprint, you start having a lot of variety of consumer preferences that come into play as well, because the broader you start stretching, there's different tastes in regards to level of saltiness, spiciness, the list goes on and on. How do you manage that? Because, from a recipe standpoint, what's perfectly fine for one person, when you go into another territory, may end up not fitting. So do you adjust the recipes as well for geography, or is it more on the aggregate?
Yeah, I think that's actually the most upcoming exciting opportunity for us, because Southeast Asia is so diverse, right? Exactly what you're saying, like even within a single country, between region, you have significant differences in taste preferences and other preferences, right? The type of data that we are able to collect allows us to actually, serve these customers with a more optimized product for that. And I think it's quite interesting to see, if you look at Southeast Asia, any of the large like the big success stories in food have a significant element of localization in it. You can essentially go through the whole roster of the big international chains. They have several significantly localized the product offering and even the taste for different countries. I think the type of data that we're able to collect will allow us to take this kind of to the next level, not just different offerings by country, but eventually even by region, by cities, and maybe even eventually by neighborhoods, right? To really cater to the local hyper local taste preferences.
Okay. Okay. So when you kind of envision that from that localization, depending upon how granular it ends up getting, if it really gets down to the hyper localization, when you start kind of envisioning that, my mind starts thinking about, wow, if there's a lot of variability or customization, how do you control costs in regards to the supply chain? Because there's volume discounts and all of that, that it behooves a person to try and stick to as much of a confined sort of variability. How do you envision that? Or am I just thinking of it wrong from that standpoint?
Yeah, I think the important bit in this space is really around the in terms of the operation cost, especially like in terms of the food preparation, a little bit less so in terms of the food ingredients, because in terms of purchasing, definitely there are economies in procurement, right? Economies of scale, but they are also relatively less important than what you can get through in terms of in the food preparation. Yeah? So if you say if you go to like a couple of orders of magnitude higher volumes in terms of for like certain ingredient that you purchase, you might maybe save 5%, 6, 7%. So it's kind of that range, which hence also typically, I mean, even the largest scaled up food companies, maybe the offering is a little bit more attractive, but it typically doesn't mean, they have like a monopoly and can undercut everyone else, right? So I think that is one aspect. So what we really focus on in terms of just the food preparation, that we build like a very advanced system that allows us to ensure consistency. Again, the ability to launch new items quickly, also serve food very at a fast preparation speed, etc. So we use a lot of automation, a lot of tech guidance in the kitchens to empower our crew members.
Okay. So when you do that, so that's a big chunk of the cost and all of that goes in. When you manage that, do you go off of like the made fresh at a location, or do you centralize a large portion of the preparation and then it's kind of heat and serve sort of model? Where do you kind of fit in on that spectrum?
Yeah, it's a very important question, right? Because there are a lot of elements you need to balance, and a lot of questions with if you centralize or can't decentralize a lot of the cooking process, and there are like different steps, right?
Sure.
So for us, it's really taking a lot of the different constraints that we have in the system and finding that the right balance, while obviously the number one kind of North Star metric that we have in the company is really the food ratings, right? How our customers rate the food after they ordered it. So that's the most important metric. So we would where we look at in every single step of the preparation, how can we optimize for that? Again, giving all of the other constraints. So it's definitely and I think that's also why a system is so important. You don't want to rely on one chef to have a good day or a bad day, which then determines how the food tastes, right? That's definitely what you don't want to do, especially not at scale.
How much when you talk about the chef side of it, because there's an aspect of when you do if you do decentralize a lot, or which either way on the model, there is a component on kind of ensuring the training of that chef and all of those different characteristics. Some people try and automate it by basically creating like the factory model, as if it's no different as like a car manufacturer. It's boom, boom, boom. Everybody does a specialized step, that sort of thing. How do you view that in incorporating automations and process flows?
Yeah, it's a very big topic, right? So it's really comes down to all of the specific ingredients and components of a meal, right? Again, we want to make the food very affordable, right? So we need to consider the efficiencies from if you cook at a larger scale, but at the same time, again, it's all optimizing for the taste, right? And I think what I often see in the food space, people like if you go to kind of large scale food manufacturer, then the taste is always like heavily compromised. If you think about your average caterer or or any food manufactured meal, right? So it's so what we focus on is having indeed like an element of specialization for the food preparation, and again using a lot of tech guidance and also automation cooking to just eliminate inconsistency and kind of the kind of the human error that you would naturally otherwise get.
Okay. Now, tell me a little bit about your geographic footprint. How many locations do you have, and how far apart are they spread out at this point?
Yeah, so we just have now launched our 40th location, and so starting from the first one in what was it, 2020 in December, right? So have grown very fast. We have another more than 30 location in the pipeline right now that we're looking to open over the next 9 to 12 months. I'm currently really focused still on central Malaysia, so more than 7 cities, 4 different states, but slowly making our way also more to the south, and then also especially the East Coast. And then after that, also looking at other countries across Southeast Asia.
Okay.
I think that will keep us very busy. I think generally, right, what we kind of want to drive is really this change in terms of the product development in the entire F&B space, where we believe this will be relevant around the globe. Any market where you have a high share of out-of-home prepared meals will be interesting for us.
Yeah. And I assume when you're opening more of these locations, the same conversation that we had on the centralized versus decentralized, the supply chain of getting inputs into locations, all of that becomes a much more relevant conversation to be having. Maybe when you're in a geographic concentration of central Malaysia, it's perfectly fine. But as you start moving north and south or international, it adds some layers of complexity.
Yeah. Again, I think this technology plays a huge part in that, because it just allows you to optimize so many processes. Even if it comes down to things like how your inventory works, how you shift ingredients around, etc. That's I think many of us who come from the tech industry, right, think this is like a given that this is all automated. The reality is actually, if you look at the largest convenience stores chains in Malaysia, for instance, in most of these guys, they still have like the store manager deciding about the inventory, how much they should order from the supplier, which sometimes if you go into a convenience store, you see like overstocking or the like very basic products are not available, right? So that's really the reality where again, technology can allow you to avoid all of that, right? So that's what we heavily built on in terms of scaling and expanding geographically.
Okay, and you look at trying to build a lot of that in advance of scaling. So you're kind of looking ahead and saying, okay, what systems, what data do we need to collect so that we can optimize prior to launching, and then continue to optimize as you get the learnings from post-launch.
Yeah, so the basic systems we have essentially already built, because even at the current scale, right, like running essentially 40 locations is, if you don't have a system, is extremely challenging, right? So we already had, in a sense, we had to build that. And this will also be, so for instance, the inventory management system or the logistics system can then be easily extended. Of course, when it comes to completely new geographies, there's additional learning steps we have to do in terms of the location selection somewhat, because at the end of the day, it still will be similar data points that we just have to collect. There will be some fine tuning required probably, right? If we go into completely different countries. And then like some basic parts about the supply chain that we would have to add. Right.
When you talk about being data oriented and capturing a lot of this, whether it's the ratings from customers on the recipes, whether it's the performance of individual menu items at a particular location or overall on the aggregate, when you're looking at the performance of the company as a whole, footfall in a restaurant, all of these different data points, did you have to build the capabilities in-house to have your own like internal ERP system in order to capture, analyze, and develop insights from, or was there something available in the market that you then customized further?
Yeah, I think I would say we have done both. So typically, and I'm very grateful for my co-founder, right? So that so I think our tech team has the mindset that if something is available off the shelf, right, we start with that, and then we just continuously see, okay, can we get additional efficiencies, savings, or better customer experience by kind of rebuilding that tool, right, and integrating deeper into our system. And that has meant, across the entire supply chain, essentially, we have completely rebuilt systems, like, for instance, logistics system in terms of last mile delivery. We have built our in-house routing algorithm completely from scratch and built this to a very sophisticated level. Inventory management, I already mentioned, right? So we've built in-house, et cetera, but there are certain tools, for instance, that where we just stick with the off-the-shelf stuff. When, for instance, it comes to customer analytics, right? We don't want to completely rebuild kind of mobile analytics for our mobile apps. That wouldn't make much sense. Yeah. Data warehouse, for instance, we use an existing open source tool for that, actually, and some parts of the ERP also we use another existing off-the-shelf item for that. So it's always kind of the question, right? How do you spend your engineering resources? And I think it's been always quite interesting to continuously evolve the system.
And it's a constantly moving target, I assume, because as you continue to expand, you're encountering new challenges from the data collection process and all of that. So it keeps your tech team and your co-founder quite busy, yeah?
Yeah, I think it's it's obviously fantastic to have a very strong in-house tech team, because it's you see this with like things like ERP implementation, right? So for instance, we're using an open source ERP tool, where if you go with one of the very big brand names, you would have easily spent $100,000-$200,000 in implementation. And every time you want to make a small change, implement a new feature, you have to call the consultant, and then they charge you again like 10K or something, right? So these kind of things, I mean, that's fantastic to have the ability to build this all in-house, right? And save all of that money. Yeah.
Okay, very cool. So we talked about the intent of expanding north, south, east coast, potentially internationally. When you look at it as an organization, like what's next on the frontier? What gets you excited? That's either currently in the pipeline, or that's kind of like an anticipated one that's going to be coming soon.
Yeah, there are many exciting parts. So I mean, for sure, just the continuous expansion, because I think the last 24 months we have really focused on building all of the important parts to have in our system where we can scale fairly easy and just keep on aggressively rolling out, right? In the early days, we obviously didn't have that. So every time you launch a new location, that was very, very difficult and added complexity. Now we have built a system where every additional location doesn't increase complexity, which is quite important, right? If you want to grow fast. So that of course means expanding across first Malaysia still, and then Southeast Asia. So next market we are very excited about Indonesia, and also after that the Philippines. In terms of just the roadmap, I think it's super exciting what becomes right now possible in terms of with the use of data, right? Currently we kind of we call this internal process food engine, how we develop recipes is very much kind of a hybrid, where we use technology and so machine and human, right, to develop new recipes, which limits a bit the ability of what you can do. So kind of what we're right now working is to take that to the next step, that we can feed much more other dimensions of data into that system when we generate recipes. Think of it as, right, we have like hundreds of different suppliers, each has hundreds of or thousands of different items and ingredients and pricing, etc. What we kind of envision is you build a system where you can put in all of the customer feedback on the one hand, right? That allows you to develop a very exciting recipe, but you can also put in all of the supply side aspects, so that the system can actually develop a recipe that is not just optimized for taste, but also in terms of value for the customer, and also the margin profile and profitability based on simply all of the available ingredients and all of the other factors, right? So that's kind of in terms of the tech system what we're working on as a next step.
Okay.
Because fundamentally what we envision there is that it will open up a completely new type of products and recipes that has never been able to be done prior to that, because there's so much complexity in that. It's essentially impossible for humans or even a team of humans to take all of these factors into consideration, right? But
Sure.
Technology makes this possible. So
putting together an AI model that can actually kind of connect the dots between supply chain optimization, recipe optimization, and margin optimization, all kind of combined into the one pot.
Exactly, yeah. And then even, how different ingredients interact with each other, right? How can you replace certain ingredients to just be able to make the meal much more affordable for consumers?
Sure.
So all of these factors. So it's a very exciting area. And again, I think food is so important, actually, right? I mean, it's kind of every day people just eat kind of casually, but I think for most of us, it's a very integral part of your day, and can be extremely powerful to make people's life.
Okay. Yeah. And what's your favorite meal off of your menu? What's your go-to when you're kind of eating your own product?
Right. Yeah. That's a great question. But I think there's a bunch of items I love, especially kind of the more spicy ones. So we have like, for instance, ayam gepuk, which is a bit more Malay Indonesian cuisine dish with a fantastic sambal, very spicy. So I love that. Or like the ayam kicap, so like really the very Malaysian flavors. Has
there ever been one that you really liked, but it didn't get it didn't get very many customers, so it was one of those like you love it but it got canceled?
So unfortunately right now we have like a big discussion on that. So we have like a fantastic chili pan meal, but we see other meals being much more popular, even though this one gets very, very high ratings, and I love this a lot. We're currently, it's kind of on the in the discussion if we have to take this off the menu, which would make me personally very sad, but that's how it is.
Is the boss going to veto the system? That's I guess that's the question.
Unfortunately, I don't have that influence. So
very, very cool. Let me wrap up here with the final closing questions that I ask everyone. The first one is, what is a tech tool that you just cannot live without?
Right. I think it's actually it's super simple. I mean, I still use Evernote. So to plan my day, have a very simple daily to-do list. At the end of the day I can look back, okay, did I achieve those things, and hold myself essentially accountable for, and then just for simple note-taking. I mean, I think there are many other alternatives to that, so I'm not sure if Evernote particularly is the most amazing in that, but I definitely use that daily.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, once you get used to a tool, you kind of have some stickiness, because there's some switching cost to learning a new system, transferring over your notes, all that kind of stuff. Exactly. Last question here. If you were to talk to another startup founder that is just getting started, what would be the biggest piece of advice that you could offer?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. I think it's really just the YC spirit, right? Talk to users, talk to your customers, and really focus on what I think not just what they're saying, but find ways to make sure that what they are saying is really what they also what they believe or what they think, right? So I think there's a fantastic book. It's called the Mom's Test, right? Where it's really about understanding or getting real signals from customers to understand truly what what the customer thinks, and not what they say, but what they really mean. And I think that's probably the most important one. That every founder I would humbly advise.
Yeah, definitely need to talk to customers. It's really the only way. And like you said, not necessarily what they're saying, but what they're thinking, which is there's some tactics around how to delve beneath the surface and really extract that. This has been a super fascinating conversation as we've navigated how you are integrating tech and data in order to take an industry that really hasn't advanced as much as many others and creating an innovative offering while still controlling price and quality. This has been super interesting. Thank you very much for sharing your story with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
All right, that wraps it up for another fantastic episode of the Sea of Startups. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. Go onto iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a review. It's the best way for us to get discovered and to have these startup stories reach a broader audience. If you have any suggestions or would like to get in touch, you can email me at kevin@indelible.vc. As always, I'm your host, Kevin Brocklin from Indelible Ventures, and this is the Sea of Startups.